I'm Jim,
And I'm Garrett.
and this is
Jim
Jim
and
and Garrett
Garrett
at
at
the
the
Movies.
movies.
Welcome, everybody. This is a special show. We are delighted to be reviewing Lego Movie 2, the second part, and Toy Story, and we'll be talking about the latest news in entertainment. And we are joined by a special guest, staff writer and associate editor of Cinema Blend, Stephen Libbey. Welcome, Stephen. Welcome to Jim and Garrett at the Movies. We are so happy to have you here.
Thanks so much. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for slumming it with us amateurs. You're the actual professional who does this for a living. So
the only reason I'm a professional is that they actually pay me. Other than that, I'm really just an amateur that gets a check.
Well, you're also our chief animated correspondent. You talk about sort of stealing a title, and you tweet about Disney movies. You write about Disney movies a lot. We'll get into a little bit of some Disney news a little bit later. But now, what's that?
We'll put your Twitter handle down below.
Yes, absolutely. Follow Steve on Twitter. Also, he writes fantastic articles for Cinema Blend. Some really interesting stuff. Under the you've got a pen name too. Do you want to tell us your pen name? Because I don't know if I can
actually. I write under Dirk Libbey, which is a very long story that would take an entire episode. But yes, that's the byline of Dirk Libbey is actually me, which is also why the Twitter handle that you'll see is Dirk, not Steve. It's a thing. Anyway.
Long stories are always the best ones, and maybe we'll have an entire podcast devoted to the Dirkness of your name. Anyway, moving right along to our first review, we'll be talking about Lego Movie 2, the second part. This is Chris Pratt returns in the lead role as Emmett Brakowski. Elizabeth Banks, Will Arnett, and Tiffany Haddish joins the cast. This is the story of Duplo blocks, I should say, that come from the Sistar system and invade the world of the original Lego Movie. We also get some new characters, some really interesting new characters, and it turns the Brickverse, the original Lego movie setting into a post-apocalyptic nightmare, which the writers Lord and Miller have some fun with. So before I give my thoughts on this film, I want to sort of turn it over to you guys. Steve, what did you think of Lego Movie 2, the second part?
Overall, I really enjoyed it. I think it had a lot of the same sort of energy and fun that the first movie did. I think the only place where it really stumbles is it's kind of the natural aspect of the fact that it's a sequel. The kind of the twist that the first movie had, that you're really just watching kids at play, was really kind of neat in that first movie, and the second one, it makes the right choice that it really kind of plays into that, because it going in this time. At the same time, the energy of that surprise is necessarily missing.
Yeah, I think you're right there. It does play into that. There's a lot more human parts than I thought there would. Wait, that sounds dirty. There's a lot more scenes with humans in them that I thought there would be, and certainly more than there were in the first film. What did you think, Garrett?
Similar thoughts. Yeah. It sort of in some ways suffers the curse of the sequel. It's trying to recapture the energy and doing an admirable job, but like most sequels, it comes in at about maybe 75% of the overall quality. It manages, I think, to avoid a lot of recycling a lot of the old jokes, or recycling some of them, but in an effective way, which is a problem that a lot of sequels have. But yeah, the emotional impact of the reveal at the end wasn't quite there. But I grew up playing with Legos. I have these same sort of imaginative worlds that the kids in the movie sort of construct. So there is a sort of homecoming feel to it, a nostalgia for my own youth, which is always a pleasant emotion to recapture in a film.
Sure, I think so too. Although I didn't have as much nostalgia with Legos as maybe you did, and I don't know about your childhood, Steve. Did you play with Legos as a kid?
Absolutely. Legos was a big part, and even still is, honestly. I don't sit around building stuff, but I do actually have. I think I have a couple of Lego figures over on my desk with other little tchotchkes and yeah, no, Legos was definitely a big part.
Yeah, it wasn't so much for me, so I didn't really get the nostalgia factor that you guys got. But I mean, I was able to sort of key in on some themes that are going on in this film that weren't in the first film, and it seems to be playing with a kind of expression of toxic masculinity. Like there's a lot of work done to sort of emasculate some of these characters and kind of put the female characters at the forefront. There's even a joke, it's in the trailer, so I'm not spoiling anything, where one character talks to Elizabeth Banks's character and says, "Hey, in the first movie, you did all of the work, but he got all of the credit. What is this?" And even the human interaction, which I won't spoil, of course, is kind of this it's relating to these themes of masculinity. I don't know if those themes really came through to say anything cogent or complete. I think it's playing with the themes more than it's actually fully exploring them. And in that sense, it kind of fell short for me, but I sort of tip my hat to the film for trying. What did you guys think? Did you see that as well, or was this kind of just a animated spectacle for you and didn't really reach for anything deeper? What do you think?
I think there's definitely some deeper stuff going on there. I think overall it does work. There's definitely some emotional, some real emotional ideas in the movie. I think calling back something Garret I think was talking about it. The only real problem with it is that because things going into the sequel that you didn't know in the first movie, they telegraph where these things are going from the beginning, and you kind of know where this is going to end up. Now, when you get there, I think it still works. Mm-hmm. The emotional impact is definitely still there. It's just maybe not quite as powerfully as it might have been if you hadn't known a mile away where it was all coming from. But yeah, no, I mean, I think there's definitely a more sort of, it's an inclusive movie.
It certainly is. Yeah. Garret?
Yeah. I definitely see what I mean. I can't say it dawned on me in the theater, but not the second you say toxic masculinity, I know sort of the character that you're talking about, and I see them playing with those themes. Yeah, not necessarily the most graceful or artful portrayal, but it wasn't ham-handed or obvious. Obviously, it didn't feel like it beat me over the head. So that's more or less works for me. I did feel there was something of a second act lull.
Yes.
They did a good job, I think, of getting us back into the world in the first act, but there was sort of a stretch when they're doing a somewhat nice sort of misdirect in some ways that ultimately pays off, but they take they take their time getting to the reveal that the misdirect is a misdirect, and it wasn't quite as funny, it wasn't quite as engaging in that inter period, but it comes back nicely in the third act. So
sure, yeah, I think that's I know exactly what you're talking about with that second act lull, and there's quite a bit of time when it kind of wallowed in its meta-ness as well. I mean, there are even some jokes about Chris Pratt's career and his the tentpole films and that he has starred in, and sort of nods to each of those, which I could have done without. And some of the meta commentary about post-apocalyptic movies that's hit and miss. I don't even know if a young audience is going to pick up on the Mad Max Fury Road references. So those elements of it seem to be trying to play to both audiences, both parents and children. And I think they'll be a little too obvious for parents and a little too highbrow for children. So it kind of misses those meta moments of the film, kind of miss the mark for me. What is more, I wonder. Well, I'll pause on that before I go to my next point about the film. Do you want to talk about the meta nature of the film, even though that's really kind of Lord and Miller's wheelhouse?
I was looking for a Star Wars Solo reference or nod in there somewhere, and I didn't see one. And I can sort of, that maybe they took the high road, or maybe they wanted to avoid some potential lawsuits. But I think they could have slid in something obliquely there. And if they did, I didn't see it. So maybe credit to them for taking the high road.
For our viewers who might not be aware, Lord and Miller, the writers of Lego Movie, and even I believe they're executive producers on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse as well, and maybe even writers on that as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they were fired from the Solo: A Star Wars Story film. So, Steve, what did you think of the meta nature of this movie?
I mean, overall, I thought the meta-ness, it works. I didn't necessarily mind the Chris Pratt jokes regarding Chris Pratt. I thought they were pretty funny. In the first movie, the first movie sets that up, and so you go into the sequel kind of expecting it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, and I think that's also part of the fun of Lego, especially now, although this is an element that came after I was playing with the toys, is, because so much of Lego is branded now, that's where they get all of these various connections, and they can do the meta-ness while still doing Lego, because so much, because Lego Batman has been a character, you can have, that you could buy forever. And that's kind of the fun of it. So, and then you throw in, and she was in the trailer too, so I'm not going to, the Lego Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who pops in for no reason other than that have the joke of a Lego Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which is funny. So, I'll take it. It's I think the Lego movie, the Lego movies proper, as opposed to the other two Lego movies, because God, there have been 4 Lego movies in 5 years.
I know.
I think the Lego movies proper do that well. It's still a Lego movie, I think, whereas like the Lego Batman movie, I feel like was that was a meta commentary on all things Batman from beginning to end. And if you're a serious Batman person, then that all works and is funny. And if you're just a Lego person, it's not really going to work. Whereas I think the Lego movies are able to kind of balance being Lego and being meta a little better.
Yeah. I think the Batman character was the point that I was going to go to next, because some of the choices that they made with that character in the second and third act did not work for me. I thought that there was some inconsistencies in the way they portrayed the Lego Batman character from movie 1 to Lego Batman to this movie. It seems like this movie, he's a very different person, a very different version of Batman. And it almost seemed as though that version of Batman that was in this film was just to serve the plot, to sort of keep that plot going. And that a lot of that didn't work for me. You brought up the Batman character. Did that work for you as well, or?
I suppose you're probably right. I mean, I would have to go back and rewatch Lego Batman to even remember, where did Lego Batman end that movie as a character in order to, and then, shifting into this new one. And you're probably right that, he probably has forgotten all of the lessons he was supposed to have learned in the previous movie. You know, I guess because it's a Lego movie, I probably didn't necessarily give that all the care in the world. but you're probably right that yeah, if we were to view the character throughout the trilogy, it probably doesn't quite add up.
I one of the things that absolutely blew me away about the first Lego movie was simply how many different properties they managed to license out. Because I mean, the lawyers must have had so many headaches trying to get everyone to sign off. And obviously, Batman was something of a standout character because he got his own standalone movie. But that having been said, part of the fun of Batman as a character is precisely that he can be reincarnated again and again and again in so many different guises in so many different ways. And that's part of what makes it fun. Now, is it kind of cheap? Yeah, that they sort of throw out the character growth so they can play it out the way they want to be. Yeah, I suppose. But again, it's at least in keeping with the sort of the tradition of Batman as a film character who is constantly rebooted over and over again. So why not?
Fair enough. Anything else you guys want to bring up about the movie before we score it and move on?
I'm good.
I'm good.
All right. So I'm giving this 2.5 stars, which is a little short of a recommend for me. I thought it was fine, but I would much rather watch the first Lego movie. I thought that one, the original Lego movie, had more energy to it. It really, it was a commercial. It was the original Lego movie was like a 2-hour commercial that really worked. And this was a 2-hour commercial that was hit and miss. And so I kind of, like, when I approach these movies, I'm probably a little too cynical about how all of the product placement is working. And that kind of pisses me off a little bit, how much product placement is in these damn movies. And so I maybe I'm going into this too cynically and not viewing it in the context, but as a whole, it still fell short. And if I were to choose between recommending a movie, I would recommend the original Lego movie over this one. So yeah, I'm a little short on this one. 2.5 stars for me. What about the rest of you?
I share your opinion that it's not as good as the original. It falls off some, and yeah, if it were between this one and the first one, yeah, the first one's clearly the superior. That having been said, I enjoyed coming back to the world. I think that they managed to recapture much, if not all, of the magic, and overall, I had a good time. So slightly better than you. I give it 3 out of 5.
Steve?
And I would do probably exactly the same. I would do 3 out of 5. I thought, yeah, no, the sequel is definitely the lesser of the two films, but there's nothing wrong with it. The first film is I think is especially good. So the sequel has an extra tough act to follow, and it doesn't quite get there. But there's nothing wrong with the movie overall. I would go 3 out of 5.
Cool. All right, moving on to our movie club entry. We are talking about Toy Story, 1995's sort of Pixar genesis, written and directed by the very problematic John Lasseter. It's the story of Woody, voiced by Tom Hanks, who is the favorite toy in Andy's bedroom. His world is Andy's bedroom, a little boy who has him the star of all of his childhood gamesmanship. Supporting cast includes Tim Allen as Buzz Lightyear, who upsets the balance of Andy's bedroom, and Don Rickles co-stars Jim Varney, Wallace Shawn, John Ratzenberger, some really great voice cast, and R. Lee Ermey, of course, the late great R. Lee Ermey, as of who else? The Toy Soldiers. This is sort of a classic film that has launched 1,000 Pixar, launched the studio Pixar until their eventual purchase by Disney. So I rewatched this film kind of went back. I had fond memories of it. And before I go into my rewatch opinions, what did you guys think of Toy Story? What do you think about this movie? And our movie club entries are spoilery as all hell, so feel free to spoil the fact that everything works out well in the end.
I'll start with that. No, it doesn't. Things do not work well in the end, and that's one of the things that I rather like about it. It almost works out well in the end. The second to last beat is finding out that Andy gets a Mrs. Potato Head for Christmas, and if it ended on that, it would qualify as a romance in the sort of classical sense, in the Shakespearean sense. It ends with a marriage, which is sort of the defining characteristic of Shakespearean romances. But that's not where it ends. It ends 30 seconds later when they find out that Andy has a dog. And they Buzz and Woody try to laugh it off, but it's pretty clear they're aware of two things. One, that dog is going to take all of Andy's time, and they're both going to be left out in the cold this time around. And that dog's going to chew the shit out of those toys. This dog is the image of death in the Toy Story world, and so I think that end is actually grim as fuck.
It's grim as fuck in a little bit, but go ahead, Steve.
I'm my Disney Pixar cred probably takes a beating when I mention this, but I don't love the Toy Story movies, which is not to say I don't like them. I think they're all good. But that particular trilogy of films is held up by most, especially if you're just looking at the Pixar canon as some of the best of the last however long. And I put a lot more of Pixar stuff ahead of most of the Toy Story films personally, which is not to say that I think it's a bad movie. It is absolutely not a bad movie. It's a good movie. The first, and they do get, but they also, within Toy Story, they get better. The first one is the roughest of the set. But it's a fun movie, and it's got it does some really interesting things, and does some fun stuff with these characters. I mean, there is a reason that they survived as long as they did, and they ended up making, wait for it, there's going to be a fourth one.
Right.
But it's it's a movie. It's a fun movie. I enjoy it.
It is a fun movie, and it's sort of it's able to kind of be a proof of concept for what would come later. The Toy Story franchise, and even I think the Lego movie kind of owes a lot to Toy Story's success. The idea of being able to create a world inside a toy universe is something that Toy Story sort of proved could work. Now they, in subsequent sequels, they added a lot more pathos. They took the characters a little bit more seriously. I mean, there's a lot of really broad comedy going on in Toy Story, which is in some ways hit and miss, but you can kind of tell that this is that they're experimenting with new technology, 3D animation, computer generated animation. You can tell that they're experimenting with it, and a lot of care was put into creating the toys to be realistic, not so much the human world. I think the human world is
I was going to say, I mean, there's a reason that the first, the main characters of the first Pixar movie are not human, and all you have to do to realize that is look at the humans. Right. Yeah, no, it's. I think you said proof of concept, and that's very much where the first Toy Story falls. It's like if you actually go back and watch Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, it has some issues as a film.
It certainly
does. But you still kind of have to, give it its due, because it started a lot. And then the first Toy Story is the same way. It has, I think when you go back and look at it now, it's got some issues. It's still a great movie. Part of the reason it's a great movie is not what it is, but what it started.
So let's try and dig deep into some of these issues that we see with this film. I mean, we talked about some of the animation, especially as it relates to the human characters. Not so much. I think the toys are fantastic. But what are some things that stick out to both of you about this film as perhaps that time has not been kind? I'm oddly enough, it was made in 1995. We probably all remember when this movie came out. It's 24 years old. That's actually really fucking scary. So what are some issues that kind of jump out to you on the rewatch?
I think, yeah, the clearest thing is the animation. Yeah, I mean it's uncanny valley all the way. Human faces are incredibly difficult to render, and it is interesting sort of to compare how the human faces evolve over the course of the series. They get substantially better. At this same time, though, I think going back over it, I thought for the most part, I thought it actually got better with age. I was able to appreciate it on deeper levels. When I first saw it, in the theaters when it came out, I was kind of down on it. It seemed kind of silly. I mean, I thought the technology was neat. I wasn't expecting the story to work quite so well on me, but it did work. But I think coming at it now with a slightly sort of more mature lens, I felt that, I mean, again, I already sort of tipped my hand. I feel that, in saying I think that Toy Story actually is about, death in a pretty profound way, death of childhood, if not necessarily death of the corporeal body. And there's actually some pretty deep stuff going on there. And then on top of that, I think the third act is just wonderfully paced. I think they do a great job of sort of setting up a series of obstacles, which have all been well established in the story world, and then giving the characters the tools they need to overcome those objects in a challenging but natural way. So yeah, I mean, as a piece of screenwriting, I think it's very, very solid.
Steve, what do you think?
Um,
See if you can articulate why I disagree with Garret.
Well,
Because I know I do. I just don't know if I can articulate it all that well.
No, I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, I don't disagree with Garret. I mean, in all honesty, I mean, I think his points regarding the story are solid.
Certainly the story construction I agree with. I think the
Yes.
third act is paced well. I just don't see these themes of like larger themes going on here. I mean, I actually think that it's in terms of thematically the film is a little bit thin.
So maybe I can unpack that analysis a little more.
Yeah, please.
I suppose I should give credit where it's due. My analysis here actually owes a debt to Angus Fletcher. He has a lecture series on screenwriting for the Teaching Company, and one of the lectures is on Toy Story, and so I'm borrowing heavily from his analysis here. But as Fletcher sort of reconstructs it, the story sort of starts off with everything is changing, right? The family is moving, everything's boxing up, and Woody's kind of in denial. No, things aren't changing. Things are going to be the same. We're going to be in control. But then when Buzz shows up, of course, Buzz, not realizing at the beginning of the film that he's actually a toy, is sort of living in a completely different world. So he's totally this symbol of everything being different. And sort of as Woody deals with the fear of being supplanted, of no longer being the favorite, of no longer having the love of his life, basically, right? Andy, there sort of to reflect, and it sort of foreshadows that, look, even if he survives the arrival of Buzz, sooner or later Andy's going to grow up. He's going to move on, literally, not just move from the house, but move to a different stage of life, where he puts away childish things. And those toys, while they may have a beloved place in his heart, are no longer going to be his playthings. And again, that's what the dog at the end kind of symbolizes. The dog is going to be his new love, his new affection. And both Buzz and Woody are now going to be supplanted. But it comes back on a note of sympathy, because at least now Buzz and Woody can go through that process together rather than fighting with each other as they do throughout the first two acts of the film. Now they at least have each other as friends. And so, again, it's sort of this existentialist sort of sentiment. Yeah, we all die, but at least we get to be in it together for the meantime. And that's the kind of shit that I just eat up with a spoon, man. I love that.
I think that's absolutely true of Toy Story 3. I think everything you said is absolutely right about Toy Story 3. And if there hadn't been a sequel, then or if we were, you know, sort of digging into Toy Story 3, I think you're right. I think that movie's definitely about death. I mean, I wanted to know a little bit more, and I wanted to feel a little bit more Buzz's existential crisis when he realizes that he's a toy. I mean, I almost wanted the film to shift protagonists when he's like, this is my new reality. I am not unique. In fact, I am a product that is being sold in this other commercial. And that moment I thought was really good. And I wanted to sit in that moment for a little while longer and even deal with Buzz kind of rejecting that or fighting against that. But instead he sort of gloms on to Woody. And then that's exactly where he needs for the next part of the plot to go through. So that's where I see the weakness and the weakness in the degree to which this film explores those existential themes that you're talking about. I think the movie's good. I like it. I basically recommend it. I'm not going to put it in the upper echelon of movies that exist. Like, and of course, I'm not asking for this to be like Toy Story directed by Ingmar Bergman. Like, I don't want Buzz to be playing chess with death at the end of this movie. But I did want there to be a little bit more. I wanted to dig into that real conflict a little bit more. What did you guys? Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I feel like it. I mean, yeah, I think if you were saying that Toy Story 3 very much has those themes, and I think the Toy Story, trilogy taken together does as well. I think that works well. And maybe it is just because, I can't turn off the fact that I've seen the other two movies and I know where it goes and I know what those movies do. And I think both of them are superior to the first one. And maybe that's the problem, is just that it feels weak because, because the other ones, do that better. And because the first one, I'm sure when they were making it, they probably, they probably weren't thinking about sequels, but they also probably weren't thinking we need to make our first, computer animated movie this serious existential crisis and view on death. And so it ends up being lighter than it could be intentionally, because they were still making a cartoon and wanted it to be, more sort of broad audience and weren't sure how far they could go with it.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it is sort of a valid pushback against my criticism to say that the movie that you want doesn't fit the genre that this movie wants to be, and that's fair. Yet at the same time, I like big swings even in kids movies. I like Ants, which was a sort of contemporary with Toy Story, the DreamWorks Woody Allen movie. That's like all about Marxist economic theory in a movie about ants. And I really dug into that movie. I kind of like that more than Toy Story, which for many people is is blasphemy. But yeah. Okay. Do anything else before we want to wrap up this one?
I will say, just because you mentioned the scene again, the milk crate scene where Buzz is trying to reconcile his existential angst. Again, I think that is a scene that sort of shows, you want to see him sit with that existential angst more, but I think what the purpose of that scene is precisely to show how to overcome that existential angst. For Woody, he's wrestling with his planned obsolescence. And Buzz is wrestling with the fact that he's a plastic piece of fiction. He's not what he imagined himself to be. And he's, what greater existential crisis can there be than realizing you're not who you thought you were? Right. But by reflecting back to him, his own sort of existential sense of ennui, his sense of purposelessness. When Woody says, you know, I'm the useless one, you're the great toy, I'm obsolete now. You know, Buzz sees his own pain in Woody's expression, and that's what binds the two of them together, and that's what changes the course of their relationship. Prior to that, they were fighting. After that, they're flying, and you know, they're doing it together as friends. And I mean, again, I think that's in a lot of ways sort of the moral of the story. We're all going to die, but you know, it's through friendships that we find in the meantime that make it tolerable. And so, yeah, I dig it. I dig it.
You're making me like this movie more than I did before I started this podcast, which is exactly what really good film criticism does, you know. One thing I wanted to bring up was Daniel O'Brien had a bit on this back when he was with Cracked, so I'm nodding to him as I say, how about the character of Sid? Like, that, talk about an existential crisis. That little boy realizes that toys are real. Like, what? I would have been okay with a PG-13 movie for Toy Story where they use up their F-bomb, and he says, as soon as Woody's head spins around, he goes, "What the fuck is this?" That's and Daniel O'Brien proposes the idea of having a Sid spin-off of how he becomes an actual productive member of society after realizing that toys are real. He's a great villain, which has this really great resolution where he realizes what he's been doing, and his creations come after him.
And someone on Twitter made the observation that if one of the toys actually died, Andy would be playing with the toy's corpse, and the rest of the toys would have nothing to do but sit there in horror while it happened.
Yes, I mean, they even step on one of the soldiers, and of course they don't show the soldier actually being crushed into this tiny pancake of plastic, which would have been kind of macabre, and also hilarious. But all right, we have also created our R-rated Toy Story, one that is far bleaker and darker than anything that that Pixar would ever produce. All right, so Garret, let me guess, 4 stars?
4 stars.
4 stars. All right. What do you think, Steve?
I three and a half, somewhere in there. Right now, we'll say 3. Ask me tomorrow, maybe it'll be 3.5.
I was at 3 walking into this, but after
3, and then I talked to Garret. Now it's 3.5.
That's exactly what happened to me. Yeah, I was all ready to do a 3, and then Garret convinced me into a 3.5. So, well done, Garret. I think Pixar's public relations is on the phone right now, so you might want to get that call. Good for you. All right, so let's. I wanted to talk about brief. Our main news item is going to be the it's part of our ongoing series. We have an ongoing series here, Steve. It's called This Week in Death, and we talk about the great actors or entertainers who have perished in the week. And so we will be talking about Albert Finney in a little bit. But I wanted to draw attention to your article on Cinema Blend. It's probably one of the best titles on Cinema Blend right now. Wait. What did you think Will Smith's live-action genie was going to look like? Do you want to talk a little bit about what you wrote and tell us about the controversy and blah 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 blah?
Well, so yes, if you haven't seen it, during the Grammys, we got I guess technically it's not a trailer; it was an ad spot for the new live-action Aladdin movie that's coming out in May, and it gave us our first look on screen of Will Smith as the genie. And he is CGI, but he looks like Will Smith, and he is also blue. And that's pretty much what he looks like. He looks like, honestly, he looks like every other film genie that you've ever seen in any movie ever. except he looks like Will Smith and he's blue. Now this is not the first official look of Will Smith in Aladdin that we have seen. Maybe a month or so ago, Entertainment Weekly did a cover story that included Will Smith, and he looks like he's not. And in the images that were used by Entertainment Weekly, he is not blue. He just looks like Will Smith. The genie looks like a normal person. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you wouldn't know you were looking at the genie. And everybody complained that, but wait, he's not blue. And now he's blue, and now everyone's complaining because he looks blue and he looks terrible. But my main point in that piece was when I saw those pictures of Will Smith, and he then on social media made sure to reinforce that, no, it's okay, guys, I will be blue in the movie. I was like, okay, then he's going to look like this picture, except he'll be blue. And that's pretty much what he looks like. And I'm not sure what anybody else was expecting, because it is ultimately the live action version of Aladdin, and he is Will Smith. You're not gonna hire Will Smith to play your genie and not have him look like Will Smith.
Right.
Now, whether he looks good, looks bad in this image, I think honestly, I think he looks fine. I don't love it, but it doesn't bother me. I don't think it's gonna ruin the movie in any way. I also don't think that's the version we're gonna see a lot in the film. My guess, based on the fact that he looks entirely human in these other images, is that the genie will make himself look normal in order to blend into the story in some way. And that's the version we will probably see the most of in the film overall. So the fact that he maybe looks a little off as a CGI Will Smith doesn't really bother me overall.
Yeah, and you quote a lot of the reactions. If I were a child seeing that Will Smith genie CGI, I would have nightmares for a smooth week and a half. Another one, I love Will Smith, but I really think this role was meant for Dr. Tobias Funk, the David Cross as a blue person in Arrested Development. Garrett, you use that tweet as well. Yeah, so there's a lot of there was a lot of negative reaction. You're just basically saying, calm down, folks. This is what it was always going to be. It's not. Yeah, I mean, if anything, when I saw the original images, I was like, this is a rough cut CGI. They're gonna sharpen this up before,
right? And that's the other side of it, is there's no guarantee that what we saw in this trailer is going to be the final version. Digital effects are being worked on until they can't be worked on anymore.
Right.
And especially now, if somebody at Disney decides they really don't like the response that's getting, then then someone is at work right now, changing it up in some way to make it to polish it, make it look better, make it look different, in whatever way.
Yeah, I think the still images look fine. It was only when he started to move that it looked weird, and that says to me that the CGI is just not done yet.
Yeah,
and they're
I mean, I guess it's when it comes to if you look at the CGI humans in Rogue One, some people didn't have a problem with those characters. Some people went all Uncanny Valley on them. And so it's gonna, and that's gonna be the case here. Some people will not mind it. Other people will think it's terrible, and it is what it is.
Right. I mean, it all depends upon what they do with that story and
right.
Smith's actual performance. Garrett, did you want to throw in on this, or?
Yeah, I mean, I somewhat of a cynical take on it. I also didn't quite see what the big deal with Will Smith was, because I thought the spot itself made the whole project look bad.
Yeah.
So I don't know why they focused on Will Smith, because in fairness, I suppose I think the original Aladdin's kind of a crappy movie. So, and I'm not really a big fan of the live action remakes of all the old Disney films as a concept. So I'm definitely not the target here.
I agree with both of those points, but I feel like we need to devote an entire podcast to why Aladdin is not a good movie, and why the live action remakes. I mean, I don't. That's an hour conversation because I think we also did just piss off the entire internet by saying we didn't like Aladdin. That's the sound of 1,000 people going "fuck you" on dislike on the YouTube videos. We'll have the nightmares this evening. So yeah, I maybe when the film comes out, we'll invite you back, Steve, and we can talk about the actual film.
Would love to come back to talk about Aladdin. Would love to come back to talk about all the live action remakes. I have many thoughts.
Oh, I bet. I think a lot of people do. So let's move on to Albert Finney, one of the great actors, everything that I've heard about him as we've read obituaries about him is that he was also quite a gentleman as well. He's a lifelong actor of both stage and screen, Oscar-winning actor for Tom Jones back in the day, I believe. Yes, best Oscar-nominated actor for Tom Jones, and Golden Globe winner for The Gathering Storm, and Scrooge as well, and Tom Jones. I know him best from my favorite film of all time, which is Miller's Crossing, where he plays Leo. Albert Finney, he was also fantastic in Big Fish. I know him in his later years. Big Fish and Miller's Crossing are the two films that I'll remember him most for. He also played Kilgore Trout, who is one of my literary heroes in the film version of Breakfast of Champions. Unfortunately, Breakfast of Champions is a shitty movie. And his great performances. What's that?
But it's not his fault.
It's not his fault at all. No, that's everybody else's fault except for Albert Finney's performance as Kilgore Trout. Annie, and as Hercule Poirot in Sidney Lumet's great Murder on the Orient Express, the only Murder on the Orient Express that I will recognize as existing. Any memories of film memories of Albert Finney, Steve or Garrett?
You mentioned Big Fish, and anyone who sat through my analysis of Toy Story, knows that death is a theme that I appreciate a lot. I think Big Fish handles death in just such a wonderful way. It's graceful, it's artful, it's one of Tim Burton's best, and he's wonderful in it. It brings up that's a conversation film for me. That's a film I can talk about for hours with people. And so yeah, that's going to be for me the thing that I remember him most as. I mean, again, all the roles you mentioned. He's also great in Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, which is another Sidney Lumet film.
Right.
He was one of the few highlights, I think, of Skyfall, which I was not a terribly big fan of, but I liked him in it. So yeah, I mean, and again, yeah, like you say, all these people coming out of the woodwork to tell their memories of what a seemingly sort of solid guy he was. So it's always sad, but again, with my mind to my sort of existentialist thinking and to Big Fish, somehow, hoping, of course, that the people that loved him and he himself, of course, at the end, can sort of come to terms with their own mortality.
Yeah.
That's really funny because I was going to say Big Fish too. I feel like that movie is just criminally underrated. It's a fantastic piece of work. But and I mean, and I think his, of all the Ebenezer Scrooges of the world that there have been, he's one of the best, honestly, ever.
Yeah, I agree. George C. Scott played Scrooge once, didn't he, as well?
Yeah.
I thought that was really good. George C. Scott and Albert Finney can have dueling Scrooges.
Yeah.
And,
Bill Murray's always going to be my Scrooge.
Bill. No more. That movie's a mess. But yeah, the introduction of Albert Finney and Miller, just so that I could stay. I love Big Fish too. I agree with both of you. Criminally Underseen. I think it's Tim Burton's best movie, bar none. I'd put it above any other Tim Burton film. But the first scene in Miller's Crossing, where John Polito goes through this really long monologue about ethics, and he says, "So it's clear to you what I'm saying." And Albert Finney, without moving a muscle except for his mouth, as mud. It's sort of the perfect introduction to this character, and he's such an imposing presence later in the film when he's beating the shit out of Tom, and when he's got the old man still an artist with a Thompson, when he's fighting the attack with the Tommy gun. That whole scene is Coen action, worked out perfectly, and Albert Finney plays it as well as can be done. And of course, earlier at one point in the film, he's actually a bit part in drag as well, which is very funny. So yeah, I'll stick up for Miller's Crossing, but all of these movies are great, and we missed it. We lost a real true artist when Albert Finney died. So anything else about Albert Finney before we wrap up for today?
Good.
All right, let's tell. Well, Steve, do you want to? So you're a writer for Cinema Blend, staff writer and associate editor for Cinema Blend. You got anything new in the pipeline that you want to tease before we wrap up and say goodbye and thank you for?
Well, nothing specific. I'm actually just coming off of a vacation, so I'm getting revved back up again. My review for Isn't It Romantic will be going up sometime this week. I just finished off that screening. So that'll be the next major thing I've got going on. But yeah, no, check out cinemablend.com, and whatever. I will have something, or somebody else brilliant will have something worth reading. Yeah,
it's one of the really great entertainment and film websites. And so thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Good. Well, next week we will be reviewing Alita Battle Angel, and we'll be pairing that with Rollerball. That was your suggestion, Garrett. Rollerball. I've actually never seen it, so this will be an interesting weekend when I'm seeing a whole bunch of movies, all of the Oscar shorts, Alita Battle Angel, Rollerball. So many movies. I will enjoy my life for a little bit. So until then, my name is Jim.
And I'm Garrett.
And this is
Jim and Garrett at the movies.
Good night.